I've taken the bulkheads out of the clamps and have cleaned up the glue. In order to clean up the glue, what I did is I just used my block plane and kind of planed it off, and then used a little bit of sandpaper to get the residue off. I may have to do a little bit of adjusting on these bulkheads, so I may be taking a little bit more off, but block plane works pretty well for that as long as it's sharp. I've also gone ahead and put some coats of Minwax polyacrylic. So this is just a water-based polyacrylic protective finish. I'm using clear satin. This is what I use for the sides as well, and it works pretty well, and dries really fast, and I can usually, many times I can get 3 coats on in a day. So I've put 2 coats on. When I put the first coat on, then after the first coat went on, it raised the grain a little bit. I sanded it with some 220 sandpaper, and now I'm ready to put the third coat on, and I'm just going to scuff it up with this it's like a Scotch-Brite pad, and this is a red, so it's I don't know, I think that's a medium, whatever it is. I'm not sure, but it seems to work pretty good to just kind of scuff it up a little bit, take down any little bit of roughness, and then put the polyacrylic on. So now to put the polyacrylic on, I just use a cheap foam brush. Seems to work pretty well, and I wash them out in between and reuse them, so it cuts down on the cost, and I like the way it goes on. Okay, you can see that it actually does pull up some of the finish, so you want to make sure that you clean this off real well. So what I use is just a shop towel, and I press pretty hard and just kind of swipe it off, and then I go over the whole thing just with the bare hands, and that seems to get most of it off of there. Yep. Alright, it's pretty clean. Okay, I've mixed it up well, and I'm going to go ahead and put it on there. Now, on a previously coated surface, sometimes it's a little hard to see, so I just kind of look at the reflection from the overhead light. I'm not a painter. I'm not really this finishing wood is probably one of my least favorite things to do. When it comes to doing things around the house, my wife doesn't let me paint because I get impatient and don't do as perfect a job as she does, and that's for real. She can cut in windows and things like that without taping them, and there's just no way that I could do that. I just get impatient. But I do like having a nice finish once I'm actually working on it. So one of the things that I've learned is that you can see right here there's this edge. So how do you get rid of all these brush marks and whatnot? Well, always finish into your wet edge. So always pull the brush from the dry to the existing wet edge, and it just kind of feathers this edge. Now this polyacrylic lays down pretty well, so when you first put it on, you're going to say, oh, it's got all kinds of bumps and bubbles and all that kind of stuff. Well, if it's got big bubbles, you've got a problem, and that's probably from over brushing. But little bubbles, little brush marks, things like that, in my experience, lay down, and you get a pretty nice smooth finish. So that gets rid of all these brush marks, and I just continue on down the board just like that. Okay, I've got them both coated, and that's the last and final coat. So as far as I can tell, that's going to be the last coat. One of the other things I'm doing is I'm coating just kind of this strip of spare plywood. The reason I'm doing this is because this is representative of the ceiling of the teardrop. And if I can, I would rather finish the inside of the ceiling when it's on the bench, nice and flat, rather than trying to do it over my head, which would really, I wouldn't like that at all. So I would much rather do it on the bench. And so I'm coating this scrap on the bench just to make sure that when I make the bend with it, it doesn't cause that finish to crinkle up or something like that. So far, it looks like it's going to be fine, but I just put the final coat on it, and I'm going to test that out a little bit later. So that's it with the bulkheads, and now we move on to the floor system. So as I was looking to make sure that I had put finish and put polyacrylic on everything that I needed to, I realized I hadn't put it on the doors yet. So I pulled the doors out, and it's been a while since I've worked on the doors, and I realized that they weren't finished, so I needed to finish those. So so here's the door. There's the inside of the door, and they hadn't been trimmed around the edges, so I used my my router with my trim bit and trimmed around the edges. And if you'll remember, on the insides, when I put the windows in on the other side, I cut these out so that the window fits fine. But the trim ring that's on the inside, the trim ring is a little bit bigger, so I need to cut this out in order to allow this trim ring to drop down in so I can fasten the window. So in order to do that, what I'm going to have to do is take about 1/8 of an inch off all the way around here, down to the depth of about 3/4 of an inch. Well, I couldn't figure out a way to do it with a template, so what I'm doing is I'm using my router with a plunge bit and going down 3/4 of an inch, and then I'm freehanding it. So that's a little bit nerve-wracking, but I did one already and was able to make it work, so I'm going to go ahead and freehand this one. It doesn't come out very pretty, but it's going to be covered by this trim ring, and so hopefully this one will turn out okay too. So for this cut, I'm going to run the big dust collector. I'm going to try and keep the dust down in here, and I'm going to wear hearing protection, and I'm also going to wear a respirator, so you'll see me with that, because this makes lots of little pieces, and I'm going to have my head right down here, and I don't want to be breathing it. Okay, let's see if it worked. Yep, drops right down in there. You can see the slot here. So the window goes under there, and this drops down, and these holes right here screw down into that window.